Hello, everybody. This is Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am Chris Gazdick, a mental health and substance abuse therapist since 1995. That sounds crazy, doesn't it?
I was 12.
1995. 1912?
I was 12.
Oh my God. That's terrible. I have the book out still, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. This is where you get personal insights from a therapist directly in your own home and personal time in your car, but not the delivery of therapy services in any way. Always need to point that out. We definitely talk about a lot of therapy things. In this one, we're going to talk a little bit about really some things I think kind of more in the therapy office, some things that we're trying to do and thinking about, because the topic is going to be why do we rationalize things so much? So see the world through the lens of a therapist. 5-star reviews is really helpful. Apple iTunes, Spotify. Apple iTunes especially lets us to make comments. That's very helpful to us. Listen, I'm really thankful to you, the listener who follows us through around the world. We got really kind of a cool compliment randomly. Somebody was telling me they were in a conversation, Neil, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that podcast! I love that podcast." And
really?
So a new listener recently,
awesome.
and is really excited about it. So I'm really grateful and thankful that you guys are following along with us. Pretty cool.
That is awesome.
Contact it through a therapist's eyes is a great way to reach us. We have the merchandise up tab, top of the website. Hit merch. I don't know if that's clear enough. Yeah,
We'll find some way to clear it up a little bit. You got to save space on those links at the top.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Too many letters. It's too many letters.
Merchandise. That's really long. So
merch, and you get your caps, your ball caps. I bought one. It came in the other day. You saw a picture.
Saw it.
Didn't you?
That was awesome. How's the quality? Look good?
The quality's great. Yeah, absolutely.
That's always the question with those print on demands. Is like, how's the quality?
Yeah,
and
it's
what I've seen. That place does a pretty good job.
Yeah, it seems so. I haven't bought the jigsaw puzzle though, but
that needs to be in your office for people, your clients to work on.
I think so. That's a great idea.
You get different sizes. Like I said, you get the shorter
Kid
session, you get the smaller
big R version. Yeah, we need one that I could do with a kid in an hour. I am so going to do that. Contact it through therapisteyes.com, though, is the way to contact us, obviously. Interact with us. Let us know. I'm actually thinking about putting out on Facebook a post. That might be what we put out Saturday on the email list. Neil, I'd like feedback on what diagnostic show you'd like to get next. I want to do one, I think, soon, and I don't really do them very often. So recently we did one on narcissistic personality disorder, and I'd like to hear from you. So reach out to us and let us know, is there a specific diagnosis you'd like us to spend a little bit of time on? So that is a question to the listening audience. This is coming out somewhere mid-April, so thereafter at the end of April.
Yeah, it'll be mid-April. So,
right.
and just keep in mind that, like I said, we have the Facebook page. There's a LinkedIn page too. So for those that are more on the professional side, look for us on LinkedIn. We do our reminders there, and I think we'll post the same question there too to see what people think, what they want to hear next, and we want to build the
specific
feedback.
Diagnostics we have out there: depression, major depression. What is that? Post-traumatic stress disorder again. And we've talked about some of them, but there's some new diagnoses for kids and. Some different cool things out there that you might be interested in. So let us know. This is the human emotional experience of which we endeavor to figure out together. So let's kind of launch, I guess. Let's do a quick get to know Neil deal. That rhymes. What do you do for fun? Something new that people might not know about you. I can give you one of these stupid warm-up questions like, what would be your dream vacation? Something. What comes to mind that describes who this Neil is?
I don't know, probably a dream vacation would be some sort of some place with a really cool hike or mountains. I don't know if it'd be a Grand Canyon hike, because I went there, but we did the little horseshoe thing. So you don't get the same hiking experience, but Oregon, those with the green, that's why I love North Carolina, is because of that green. But we love to hike, or even a week on, the side of a ski slope. I haven't been skiing in so long. That'd be a fun trip.
Are you more a skier
again.
or more a hiker?
Hiker, because it's cheaper.
Absolutely.
Plus,
why have we not
easy.
gone on a hike yet? We need to be in the woods somewhere. How has that not happened?
I don't know. I think it's because you reach the day of. It's like, hey, I'm going hiking today. I'm like, I got family stuff.
I am kind of guilty of that.
So I tell my wife, if you give me 2 weeks notice, I can plan it and we kind of work around it, because our life.
Are you a planner?
No, but what happens is we just fill in the time. We have so much stuff we need to be doing that if you give me time, I can slot you in at that area, and then
Okay,
it's
how
like,
much time? A day or a week?
about 2 weeks.
Maybe it's not gonna. I think it's never gonna happen. Chris and Neil will never hike together.
It could be a week. It really just depends. If we're doing like Whitewater Center, South Fork,
yeah, it's
Lake Norman,
simple.
that's not a big issue.
Right,
So
right.
I can use my kids' employee pass to get into Whitewater Center. So
Yeah. Oh, cool. It's an awesome facility that's in the local area here. So I want to do a quick current event too. I've been kind of thinking that I haven't done enough mentioning or talking about the world events over in Ukraine. There's a whole lot going on in the dynamics of mental health here. Obviously, when I did talk about it, I talked about the trauma impacts, which, I mean, everyone kind of knows there's trauma impacts, but they are indelibly embedded in those that go through an experience where you're in a war zone like that. I can't speak from experience, but when you're seeing people die right next to you, and there's a whole cultural overlay now that a whole cohort has experienced this major event. Here in the States, we have it a little bit with 9/11. Everybody knows, where you were when you heard 9/11. That is an indelible cultural layer, like when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I'm sure other countries or sectors of the world, all of Europe remembers when X happened. So we have this big cultural layer that's happened now, and that'll stick with people for the rest of their or our lives. So realize that that's normal. Realize and understand that's what human psyche does with things like that. But what isn't normal are advanced signs of trauma experience. And we've done some shows on that. So everyone's going to have reactions. Some people, believe it or not, will be in the bombing in Ukraine and have PTSD, and some will not. They won't have post-traumatic stress disorder. Does that sound crazy? Actually surprising as I'm talking about this?
no, I mean we brought that up even with just dating. When they break up, some people get highly affected by it. Some people don't. I know a guy who went to the Iraqi war. It didn't bother him. He was one of the first one on the ground. But then you have other people that go through the same experience. It goes back. Everyone's different.
Yeah, and a big precursor to that is anxiety. If you have anxiety prior to a traumatic reality, then you're more likely to trigger, flashbacks and nightmares and inability to relate to people well, isolating from them, and elevated emotion with startle responses and triggered anxiety. I mean, there's a lot of things. So, but not everybody will have that.
Do you see people who have anxiety beforehand are more likely to have more severe PTSD?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it goes back to kind of personalities too.
Not really personality. What makes you say personality?
Because there's a difference. Because some people are definitely more high anxiety versus low anxiety. High stress versus low stress.
Non-clinical. You mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
definitely from my side, it's definitely non-clinical.
Yeah, no, and well, the reason why I asked that is that I'm talking about clinical anxiety. I'm glad that you said that. Then.
That makes sense.
Yeah, this is a clinical anxiety condition that is a precursor to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah,
PTSD. Yeah, that's interesting. See, that's why I need you, Neil. That's awesome. Propaganda was the other thing I really wanted to highlight, though, in a mental health social dynamic perspective. The world we live in now, we've always had propaganda. I mean, that's not anything new. As a matter of fact, I just watched a really cool documentary on Ben Franklin. It was really awesome expose on his life. And he was great with propaganda, man. Do you know what he'd do? He got a printing press and he'd do humor satires against things that he was against, and he would just make jokes and laugh about it. Sounds like a certain Zelensky, right? By the way, incredible leader. He's demonstrating some serious leadership. But the information that you put out there in the world that we live in with cameras and satellite views, and it's tough because you can try to do your normal propaganda process that man has done since the beginning of the eons, but you've got a contradictory system in place that I'm going to suppose to you is creating all kinds of emotional tug and push and pull back and forth with people that are trying to propagate an issue or a belief or a stance, and people that are taking cameras, videos in real time. So pay attention to a lot of those things. It's going to be a heck of a ride.
It's one of those things where the availability of the cameras and all that other stuff, I think there's some huge benefit in that, because sometimes people can't get away with things.
Yeah.
But then also I think in the wrong hands, or the way that it's perceived, like you said, that emotional reaction, it's like you're missing the context, you're missing the stuff. And like you said, that's the balance you have to walk. And when you talk about propaganda, there's a lot of things, a lot of pieces you have to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what's right, who's really telling the right story, what's going on in technology, what's real and what's not real too. So there's in today's society, there's so much stuff that can be developed, videoed, manipulated to make you go either way on any story. That's the struggle that we have as people not in the middle of it. Do we really know what's real, what's not? And to me, the biggest thing is there's unnecessary human loss going on, and that's the worst part about it.
Yeah,
I've kind of stayed out of which side's right or wrong, because I don't know the bigness of politics, but I know that what's going on is bad.
Yeah,
it's wrong.
This one's pretty clear. It's not hard to figure out, I think. Although there are a lot of angles to things, and I agree. I'm not going to get into that either in any kind of comments or, on this show. It's about mental health and the emotional realities that people are going through, and the torturous, tormenting traumas that are occurring, and that's on both sides. That's just on a human perspective, on a human reality. Yeah. So, we'll hopes and prayers and thoughts with anybody that knows somebody or is personally affected or has gone through losses such as death of loved ones or injuries and all the things going on. It's a crazy, difficult time. So let's get to the show topic. Why do we rationalize things so much? It's not related to the current event that we just talked about for a little bit at all, I swear. As I said that, it literally occurred to me, how that could be construed. We're rationalizing the different issues politically in the systems of the Ukraine now. But what do you think about that title? Well, I'm curious when you saw what we were going to talk about, just the idea of what you think people go about with this. I think this was one of the ones that I was really excited about doing because, I try to make the shows we do, apply to everybody. There are aspects of most issues we talk about, even if you're not an addict. We do a substance abuse show that's going to impact a lot of people around that addict and whatever. So, but this is one we all do a lot.
Oh yeah, this is almost daily or multiple times a day for most people, depending on the situations they're in.
Yeah.
This is something that I think everybody does or has done this, whether they mean to or not. This is something that human nature, I think this is something, to me, it's something that's probably ingrained in the way we are. And I think it's a survival tactic, I think, for a lot of stuff.
So I just thought of an interesting question I'd ask you at the beginning here. And then let's try to remember at the end here, and audience, everyone listening can play along with us. So if anything you can think about. In the beginning, I'm going to ask you, is rationalizing things, healthy or unhealthy, productive, unproductive? What would you say, good or bad? Is this something, and then at the end of the show, we'll talk about it and see if we can compare the two. So is this a good or bad? Rationalizing.
To the extreme is bad.
To the extreme is bad.
If you rationalize everything to make it okay, it's bad to me. That's my take on it.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Yeah, ask yourself in the beginning here at home, play along. Is rationalizing life around you, rationalizing yourself, your own actions, Is that good or bad? And we'll hopefully remember at the end to kind of look at like, well, what does that seem like now as we go down through this? So go figure. Definitions: rationalizing, attempt to explain or justify one's own another person's behavior or attitude with logical, plausible reasons, even if these are not true or appropriate. It attempts to basically explain or justify, again, one's own or another person's behavior or attitude. There's, I think, lots of ways to define rationalization. I was interested because I do like words and the way that they're used and the way that they carry meaning, how some words seem the same but are different. I feel like there were a lot of different messages or ways to define rationalizing, and I'm just wondering about that out loud because I find that curious. Most words don't have as many different ways to look at what is a rationalization. There was a lot with this. I think it's curious.
I could see, because even the definition, I can see where there's a lot of different, like even this logical, plausible reasons, even if not true or appropriate. So there's all these like kind of these caveats to every way that you're rationalizing.
Yeah. Right? You're using a lot of different angles, which is a great segue. On the video, YouTube, and Facebook Live, you can see what I do in therapy office all the time. This is a brain, right? Right, that is. It's a brain. I even do it with like a puppet, like with kids. Like, oh, this is brain talking. Yeah, hello. But you got the frontal cortex. Obviously, in the audio portion, you're going to have to imagine right above your nose on your forehead. That's our thinker, right? But if you pry that right up there, right in the middle of our brain, the brain stem, right in the middle is our limbic system. And that is where all of our emotion systems operate. The amygdala, the fight or flight, the neurotransmitting systems, the limbic system operates the flow of chemicals through our body ultimately to the way that we feel. And this is our thinking component, abstract reasoning in our frontal cortex. So there's literally two different components of the brain. Which one do you think is rationalization?
Be
Right?
the thinking side, right?
Right? The reasoning, the taking fact A, B, C, D, E, and F and combining them together to create a rational, logical thinking process. It's our frontal cortex. Okay, so you got to understand the basic different components, and what we're really focusing on today is the frontal cortex, our thought. True cognitive behavioral therapists are loving this because that's what we focus on, is thinking errors, rationalizing. That's the system that we're talking about today. Or are we? So this is where it gets really fascinating, I feel like. Okay. I forget what episode it was, but we talked about implicit bias. I've really commented about that show more than once, haven't I?
Yes.
Well,
it's so ingrained in us. I mean, that's one of those things that's so, like, almost everything we do, that's a piece of us.
It's a fascinating topic. And when we took a deep dive on that, we were going to do it as one episode. I think I was talking about that with Matthew. Well, we ended up making it a part 1 and part 2. It was one that was recently done. Why do we do what we do? Why do we believe what we believe? I think were the titles of it. And we decided to make it part 2 because it was so depthy. And we're not going to do that today with rationalizing things, but you think that we're talking about the frontal cortex. However, a lot of what we actually do with our rationalization, guess what? Is conscious, that's our thinking, but also subconscious. Holy cow. Now, what did we just ramble around on with, right? Right? Like, a lot of rationalizations we have are subconscious. So what does that mean? How does that work? What part of the brain does that even operate with? I don't know.
I feel like it's almost it kind of straddles both, the kind of your frontal and your limbic. And it's kind of this, Because I feel like part of it, when you think about rationalizing your brain, it's like, how emotionally charged are you in what happened that you take the time to rationalize it? It's kind of like if you don't care, you might not even care to think about it. But if it's something that really strikes you and you have that more emotion behind it, it's like, why did that happen? Why did that happen to me? Or why did I do that? Because, like you said, why did that person do that mean thing to that other person?
Which gets back to the definition a little bit and the intricacy of that, right? Like, you're describing being rational. Is being rational the same thing as rationalizing? And I'm not so sure that it really is. Like you said a little bit ago, it takes different little pieces around. Like, what are you really doing here? Because we're going to talk about here in the next segment real quick. This is a defense. A lot of what is happening when we are rationalizing something is we are defending. But more on that in a minute. Because right here, you got to understand what it is that you're managing if you're going to manage the destructive components of rationalization. Because there are some destructive components, there's some productive components as well. That's why thus the question is this good or is this bad? We'll talk about it and see. Because the subconscious oftentimes is driving our thoughts. And I don't think we really understand the depths of how that happens, but the key thing to understand here is that in some ways that's automatic processing. And when that's happening in ways that we don't want our automatic process to go on with, you see what we're after. Kind of gets back to the implicit bias. Why do we do what we do? Why do we think what we think? Well, because some subconscious rationalizing oftentimes is going on. So to your point, I think a little bit, Neil, don't you have to put some purposeful effort into identifying what it is that I'm thinking?
No, you definitely do. I think you definitely have to, and I think I'm looking at what happens with both when something happens to someone. What's their reaction, and do they think it's okay or not, based on their past? And then that goes back to if they think it's okay. If it is, do they need to rationalize it? If it's not okay, but they're still rationalizing it, that goes back to when rationalization is kind of on the bad, when something bad happens or something's bad going on, and you rationalize it to be okay.
Right.
Which goes back to that implicit bias or that subconscious of why in your subconscious are you going through and actually rationalizing something that's not okay.
I think, the thing is sometimes this is going on and you don't know it and you don't realize it until, and let me give you a tip. You really want to pay attention to your thought process and your rationalization of something when you have something called cognitive dissonance. That's a fancy, cool word, right? Cognitive dissonance. We have several of these crazy things. This is really simple. This is cognitive, right? Your thought process, frontal cortex. Dissonance, something that is rubbing wrong, right? So this is the discomfort caused to people by their awareness of their inconsistent thought. And that's where rationalization can reduce the discomfort by explaining away the discrepancy that's in question, right? So an example here that they popped out I thought was cool, when people who take up smoking, but after previously quitting, just decided that the evidence for it being harmful isn't really that convincing. See, you're a smoker, you quit, and you start back up again, and then you're like, well, it's okay because it isn't really that bad for me. I mean, there's a reason it takes 20 years to have lung problems. I must be okay for 5, something like that, right? But there's dissonance there. I thought that it was bad, and then I thought it wasn't so bad, and I'm not really sure if I'm doing something that's really that, bad, but is it bad? There's cognitive dissonance that is telling you, wait a minute, you need to back up, you need to really slow down, you need to really examine and go through a process to look at what is really going on with me. Because a lot of times, again, this is subconscious, y'all, and you're not really going to be thoughtful or aware of that. So this is a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a tip. Does that make sense?
It's when you do something that you shouldn't, but you still
Kind
convince
of
yourself, going back to that bad relationship, alcoholics taking that drink, gamblers who shouldn't go to a casino.
Yeah.
They know they shouldn't, but they do. Or the people that go eat fast food when they know it, they have a bad stomach for that food, or that the
Right.
I think it was that one of those Eddie Murphy movies where the lady always went to go to like a Red Lobster, even though she has shellfish shellfish
She
allergies.
loved Red Lobster so much.
But it's that and
drone.
that and that I could see where there's a lot of trauma and anxiety in that, where you're beat yourself up, that you're almost having that grief of why am I doing this, and then it goes back to the thing is you feel so bad. Well, to me it's that safety mechanism, or that survival mechanism of, well, let me rationalize it.
Yeah. No, you're on point there. That's really cool. I didn't anticipate that or think about that. But listen, this is, like you said, this is a daily chronic thing that we really all do intently. And boy, you can beat yourself to a pulp. You are your own worst enemy, which is in a little bit of a section coming up. Maybe I stand corrected. I think I did think about that. But boy, we need to move on. Otherwise, I want to go deep on some things. So let me get to some of this. So as I mentioned, this is examining rationalizing and the process for that. And I thought about it in several ways. I thought about rationalization as a defense, as a justification and minimization. And then here's interesting, right? And then to develop understanding. And then I thought about it as an active form of anxiety management. Wouldn't think of that with rationalization, but it is, and we'll get to that. And then as protection. What? What does that mean? So we'll get to that. Okay? But the big thing here that I think people mostly think about in the functions that rationalizations occur to us is as a defense. It is a way to defend kind of ourselves from our own conscious or subconscious, for that matter, beating us up, making us doubt, that cognitive dissonance. It has a lot of ways that correct inadequacies, correct insecurities, that corrects doubts and fears that we have, rationalizing them. So we often assess ourselves as acting badly and inadequate in some way, and our rationalizations turn that around to help us to feel better about ourselves, to help us to feel okay, to get confidence built. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that, it's like I said, it's kind of that, like you said, a survival. You think about the worst thing you can do to someone is take away their hope. So when you rationalize it, you kind of, you lose some of that helplessness. You lose some of that stuff. So you're more likely to move forward, because that's, with your shows about depression, like you really get stuck if you're just depressed. And if you can't rationalize your way out of it to find a way to move forward, it's very hard. So I can see where that's very important for us to use rationalization to get us stuck out of the rut, kind of like your own 4x4 to get out.
It's an interesting metaphor. Rationalizations are a 4x4 to get out of a rut. That's kind of cool. It is if you follow that line of thinking, because otherwise we really will. I mean, if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't think badly of myself and whatever. I mean, dude, you have to really stop and pause a little bit, because you're missing, the reality of what we question and doubt about ourselves. I mean, that's such a chronic, regular, everyday reality. And, to some extent, we need to defend ourselves from a lot of the negative criticisms that we provide ourselves. And rationalizing things can help with that. But it can also make us miss all kinds of stuff. So thus, you've got to realize that part of the defense prevents us from missing emotional growth. It helps us to miss a process of change. Remember that cognitive dissonance can create something good. But when you're rationalizing things away and just sort of making things okay for the sake and purpose that you want to build your ego up and maybe be more self-confident artificially, it's an interesting word that occurs to me there, then you're really, really you're creating that rut. You're creating that stuckness.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about, like, last night, my wife and I, we finally did a workout after a while. And I was in my head, I was like, I can rationalize a reason to not do my exercise.
Oh, way easy.
But then
eating, food, weight loss. Yeah.
But then it's like, but then if I go the next day, it's like, well, then I feel like crap because I didn't do the workout. And one of the motivations this time was because we're trying to get the kids to work out too. Is like, we need to start first. And so you go back to rationalizing. I could easily rationalize not doing it. But then if I didn't do it, which I did the day before, rationalizing that I had stuff going on the day before, but now I'm going to do it now.
Right.
That's where that's that balance of rationalizing stuff in the past, so you know that you can then make it through the next, but yet not rationalizing a continual avoidance or a continual bad habit. So I can see that both sides of it, where the defensive of I didn't do it, so oh shoot, I'm worthless, I can't do it. Well, I really had stuff I had going on yesterday, but now it's like, okay, now I'm going to do it, so to not avoid it, I'm not going to rationalize skipping out, and I'm just going to get it done. So that, to me, that makes sense with your defense and why sometimes it gets too far.
It's funny. It just gets convoluted, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like a circle, like a weird corkscrew circle mess.
We can live inside our head and just corkscrew and circle around like you just described. And that can be tormenting. And there's, interestingly, where sometimes there's probably a continuum, as with most things in my field. I feel like in mental health and the psychology realm, we have continuums. And there are people that probably internalize thinking more than other people that externalize thinking. And so when you're an internalized processor, you're probably going to run into rationalizing problems more often than if you're externalizing your thought process. That might be a defense almost from the destructive kind of rationalizing. I hadn't really thought about that. That's new in the moment. Did that make sense? So is externalizing your thoughts, externalizing your logic, even if nobody's there and you're just talking to the air or praying, for instance, to God or your creator, or then talking to a friend, of course, does that defend from rationalizing? Because it gets it non-circular, it gets it out, and I think that can give you an easier examination, certainly with feedback from somebody, but even just yourself, an examination of what it is that I just laid out there. I think that defends from rationalizing.
I think honestly, speaking out loud is a tool you use to rationalize. Because like you said, I mean, how many times have you? I've had this many times where you go to ask someone a question, as you ask it, you answer your own question.
Okay, yeah, you're
right.
So
to me, having it spoken out loud, even if it is just to yourself or whoever,
can be in itself a rationalization.
That can be a tool you can use to rationalize and actually get through the rationalization, because sometimes saying it out loud and you hear yourself talk versus just thinking it, you either can say, wait, that's BS. Why did I just
really want to think through that way?
Did I really? And so actually, to me, speaking out loud is probably one of the better ways to help move past the destructive rationalization cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean by, is that a tool to defeat the negative components of rationalization? Maybe I didn't say it well, because it's true in the moment. It just occurred to me. And it sounds like you're making the point. Yeah, that's actually a taught tool to do. Speak it out loud and examine what it is that you're saying. I mean, we do that in written word. Write it out before you speak it to your spouse. It's a really good idea sometimes.
But as an engulfment person, I don't promote that.
Nice. That's funny. But here's the thing that I want to get to with this defense section right here, right? We do this stuff in therapy all the time. So in my therapy practice, in my process with people, we are really getting at these rationalizations, which is part of what makes the artificial environment of a therapy relationship really effective. I can receive your thoughts, receive your line of reasoning about an event, about a person, a relationship, situation, person, place, or thing, and just play that back to you with what I see in that. And the clarity that we get to sometimes is amazing, because we're really looking at what are the root motivations for what it is that's going on in your life. And dynamically, this is why a therapy relationship can be so valuable. We're also clinically looking at what are the clinical aspects of how mental health impacts that. I probably won't talk about that a whole lot tonight, But if you have depression, this is going to impact how you rationalize. If you have bipolar, you can become hypomanic or manic and not really be in the right space to rationalize. So So I'm going to be looking at the mental health aspect. I'm going to be looking at the real thing that you just gave me. And I'm also going to be looking at the historical factors in your life that psychologically are stored up in your system, primarily subconscious, quite possibly. And I'm going to put that all together and give it to you to examine what really are the motivations here. Doesn't that sound cool? Doesn't that sound thorough? And like, I'm going to submit you almost kind of can't do that, for yourself.
Which I think that goes also back not only the importance of therapy for people that need it, but also the importance of a good relationship, whether it's a spouse, a partner, a friend.
Right. Good
because
point.
When you have those long-term relationships that you've been through all the different pieces of it, and they know your history, that really helps you properly rationalize something. Why did you do that? Chris, why did you do that? I know you have this issue from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I understand, but why did you do it this way? Or, that makes sense because of your past. And that, like I said, that's the importance of long-term therapy to me. If you really want to actually have effective therapy, you need to take the time to build a relationship with a therapist.
It's an interesting statement. Yeah.
Because otherwise,
versus some of the short-term stuff that we have nowadays, it's not as effective.
You're just not going to get it. The therapist isn't going to really know you. You're going to be able to rationalize your statements by only saying what you think they want to hear. The therapist might not get the ability to really know what's going on.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. So I think long-term relationships are very valuable to a person, especially dealing with rationalizations and dealing with your subconscious and helping you become a better person for you and for your relationships.
So I want to give some validity here, though, and honor the idea that this is precisely what makes it tough and scary to do a therapy experience in the first place. I mean, think about it. You're going to be thinking through, observing my mental health, my history, what I'm currently putting out here, and let me get this right. So you're going to be in my subconscious telling me what the heck I'm doing and thinking, and I don't even know it. Like, that sounds creepy and scary as hell. I ain't going. I'm over, I'm out, check out. I'll do it next year. Because that is intimidating, literally, to be seen that way. Now, what's beautiful is it's a non-judgment zone, and I don't have any dog in the fight, so it makes it easier to do that in a therapy venue, believe it or not. Can you think about trying to do that sometimes with your spouse? Yo, hold on, hold the phone, slow down, stop, I'm out. Sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's scary to really go through a process of looking. This takes a lot of emotional maturity. Looking at the roots, at what am I defending, what is my motivational foundation here that leads to why I'm thinking this way and rationalizing things away. That's a hard thing to get into doing.
Yeah.
Right. So let's move on then to seeing, rationalizing as a justification or minimization. So this is another one that's kind of edgy, where like as a defense, you can be defending and missing opportunities to grow, missing opportunities to gain insight. You can just rationalize things away. Well, in much the same way, we're trying to battle our subconscious here. We can be battling our subconscious by minimizing what we're doing, justifying what our actions are, like the smoking. I quit because, but I didn't really need to quit, and now I'm smoking again, and it's okay because I work out more when I smoke. It's I'll increase my workouts. It's okay.
Smoking keeps me skinny.
Yeah.
I gained weight when I stopped smoking.
There you go. Is that perfect? Right? We rationalize, we minimize, justify, and that can result in all sorts of trouble spots. Look at marriage for an example, right? I yelled at my wife. That's right, I did. But, cognitive dissonance comes in. Shouldn't yell at my wife, but I did yell at my wife. Well, let me use my rationalization skills. Okay. Well, because she deserved it. I mean, she told me I was stupid. That's not cool. She shouldn't be telling me that I'm stupid. So, I yelled at her. Yeah, I did. You see, there's a minimization in what it is that I did. And a little bit of narcissism there, too, but nevertheless, do you see how we can spin something into actually justifying really bad actions sometimes? I stole my neighbor's chickens because I literally had my family starving, so I took the chickens. Yes. Now, it might sound silly, but that stuff happens. Taking $100, or I don't know. What are you thinking? Lots of things.
I was trying to think of something that was kind of more on the lighthearted side, or not even lighthearted,
Okay.
but on the lesser side.
Too much.
No, I was just trying to think of I'm thinking about my time with my wife and our relationship, and I was thinking about where something will really affect her, and then I say some snarky comment that really hurts her feelings.
Yeah.
And then I try to minimize my reaction or minimize what I say, even though it really affected her. It wasn't good because it affected her. I shouldn't have minimized what I said. I should have rationalized my statement because it obviously affected her. It affected her subconscious, whether it was serious or not, or as bad as the next part we're going to talk about. There's still that reality of you have to understand what you're doing and how is it affecting the other person. So that minimization of me saying something that really affected her, minimizing that, well, how does that benefit our relationship if I don't really acknowledge the fact that that did hurt her?
You landed on something that a wise man said to me very recently, honestly. When you're interacting with another person, a very mature, appropriate, healthy, difficult though, I'm telling you, particularly in marriage and whatnot, to recognize I said this, I did this, and that caused for you what you're experiencing. And you need to recognize that process. It's hard because, we're so interrelated. We like to think, we're taught independent. You're an independent person. I'm an independent person. You're responsible for your feelings and emotions. That's right. Not me. You are. Oh, yeah, I'm responsible for mine. You're not responsible for mine. Now, you know what? Things are so much more interrelated and moving around that way. And I like the point you landed on when you rationalize your own actions, even if it's a snarky, silly little thing, you are pulling away the reality of what that interaction is. And it is just regardless of what somebody else is experiencing. It's not necessarily fault, because I could say something really nice like, your hair is really kind of long, Neil. That's kind of cool. And you're like, oh my God, my hair looks weird. I thought it was short. I need to get my hair cut. Like, that's bad. I didn't know that. I thought I was giving a compliment.
Yeah.
But I recognize that my saying that to you, Neil, must have caused you to feel a certain sort of way. And that's very different than just, I didn't say anything bad to you. I just made a comment.
Yeah.
Made a comment. But, this is building up, and you're right. I mean, you see on the flow of our conversation today, I mean, part of what I was building up with stealing chickens and taking $100 or whatever, like, this can get serious, such as in domestic violence. The level of rationalization can get so high that you punch your husband in the face with domestic violence and then come to a rationalization that actually makes that seem okay to you.
And I think the one thing about it is there's on an abusive relationship, there's rationalizations on both sides.
Oh yeah,
it's okay for that person to cause to be violent, and it's okay for the other person to stay there and accept it. So there's rationalization on both sides, and it's not healthy rationalization. That other person deserved what I did to them, and then that person's like, well, they were just like upset, and because I said something I shouldn't have said, it's my fault for doing that. I deserve, they're
powerful experiences where rationalization destructively is right in the middle of it. Right. It's a big deal what we're talking about tonight. Very common, oftentimes is more simplistic with simple, snarky comments and fun interactions, but it goes way deeper and bigger in powerful moments where you've been physically injured for your entire that'll affect you for your entire life, and rationalizing.
Do you see rationalization as one of the things that happen before it gets to, I think was it last year or the show before we talked about resentment? Where you start rationalizing your behavior and then it just keeps getting worse and worse. I'm doing this to them because they did this to me 6 years ago, and it just irks you. And so instead of actually really thinking through what's up with resentment, that you have that rationalization of why your behavior is that way to that other person.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I think I hear you saying is our rationalization's a precursor to resentments. And I hadn't thought about it, but in the moment with you figuring this out together, like we say, right? Yeah, that's kind of a cool thought. That's a cool connection, I think.
Because I feel like, and I feel like the rationalization almost happens after the resentment happens. Because you do something because you resent the person, you have that resentment, and then you rationalize why it was okay to have that, and then you just do it again because you're rationalizing it's okay because this person did this to me and I just resent them. So because of that, I'm just going to keep doing it because I'm rationalizing why it's beneficial to me.
Well, that's interesting then, because I could see it going both ways, and I think maybe the connection there, because I was thinking, you rationalize something away, minimize it, defend against it, miss the growth, and then a resentment is born, right?
Yeah, that makes sense too.
But you're kind of going at then the other side of that, where when the resentment is born, you continue to rationalize, then you get into the chronic state of resentment.
Right. And that goes back to the importance of rationalization and how you walk that fine line that rationalization's not always a good thing. So
right. Well, sometimes, I don't know. Interesting. Well, we'll go back to, that's where we began and where we wanted to try to end. But there's another side of it. So let's switch gears a little bit in the sense that rationalizing things can lead to an understanding. This is what we do with cognition. We are thinking. This is what we want to do. So rationalizing gets a bad rap. Yeah, and I think that's where you were talking about with your definition in the beginning. You're like, you were kind of describing more of a being rational in your thinking process rather than sort of rationalizing, oftentimes with defense and destructive characteristics to it. Being rational is being rational rationalizing, I guess you could ask, because I think there's different slants to this. When you're using your thought process, I mean, this is what, again, in the therapy realm, we use cognitive strategies. We examine thought processes. We look at the thought process that includes permanency words like all, forever, always. Neil, you never give me compliments after the show, and I always think you're thinking, right? Statements like that. No, he doesn't. That was using it as an example. So this can be a very effective component of examining things and developing understanding and realizations that otherwise you couldn't ever become thoughtful about. You would miss a lot, if you don't kind of spin a little bit. There are some people that are impulsive and movement and action oriented and don't think, right? Not a good thing. You want to have, and kind of where we're leading to the end here is really having a balance between those two things. But understand the challenge of this. So when you're thinking and trying to use cognitive strategies, back to the brain, remember? So again, on YouTube and Facebook Live, you can see my hand is in the air. This frontal cortex process, they say, is like a newer part of our brain and brain development. It's theorized. But if you pry that up and you go back right there to the limbic system, deep in our brain, in the center of our brain, right above our brainstem, if you see right there, right? Some say that that's like the oldest part of our brain is theorized. And it's more connected. And it's super, super quicker. So scientifically we know, don't hold me to the numbers, but we know that the amygdala, the fight or flight system in our brains, do this like 15 times faster than our frontal cortex.
It's survival.
Yeah.
It goes back,
Fight or flight.
because when you show the brain, I was thinking about like the design of it where you have everything you need to survive. That
right there.
everything is in the middle and
Right.
it's protected around, by everything else.
It's what dies last.
Right, exactly. And so that goes back to the way we were designed as far as your, survival of the fittest. How do you live? And so everything else is kind of like, as humans evolved, you kind of now more stuff comes out, more thinkings comes out, more rationalizations come out, but yet they're still, like you said, fight or flight. That's more important to have a faster reaction, which means your emotions are faster. You said the limbic is your emotions.
Right.
So that's why when something happens, you don't get triggered by, oh, let me think about that. This is how I feel.
You're just experiencing. You're almost kind of along for the ride. So the point here in this little segment is we want to develop an understanding. We want to use our rationalizing process to examine things. But boy, when you do, you've got to understand that your body is ahead of the game, experiencing things very, very, very fast. And so you're going to have to catch up, and you're going to have to really learn. I forget the statement, but in our trauma thing, they used that. That's where I got the hand thing. That's pretty cool. It's a brain, yeah. So they said in trauma situations, scared brain offline, something like that. So when you get into a fear response, the fight or flight, this frontal cortex just goes offline like that. Like it's not connected anymore. You're not thinking. You're not rational. You're not rationalizing. It is literally like scared body, offline brain. I forget her phrase, but it was something like that. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? But boom, and then that's just in charge because that's all you need to operate. Brainstem and the emotion system.
I mean, to me, as someone who used to wrestle, and then we've also talked about, I think with a couple of different guests about the importance of training, you want to take the thinking out of it when it comes to those types of things because you want your body to react. And so there's a training you have to be done when you're dealing with these high stress situations, or you used to do that stuff where you would go to traumatic situations and you were kind of the therapist on call.
Right.
There's that training your brain to regulate and process and how to, handle those emotional pieces is so important. And that's why if someone's impulsive and they never learn to not be impulsive, it's so hard for them to switch. Where someone who's taken the time to be more on the stoic side, there's a difference in how it's handled. But that goes against our fiber of our being, of our survival.
The way we're really kind of wired, yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard. It's hard to get to that point.
It's really challenging, and it takes, actually kind of goes back to your long-term therapy model. I am a little bit more of an advocate. I love that you're saying that, and inside I was very gleeful because I'm like, yeah, like you have to have a relationship process, with somebody to get at some of these things, to really get at them. I mean, I can make some quick changes with you in your life when you were talking about things, 5-6 sessions in. Sometimes it's like, wow, I didn't really, But that long-term relationship gets at some of these things that you're kind of mentioning on that depthier level. There's a lot more foundational things that we're trying to get at here, which it takes some time.
Yeah, and I think in anything you do, if you want to have long-term success in it, you have to put the time in to begin with. Whether you're learning how to properly rationalize or you're trying to lose weight. Still goes back to the same thing. If you don't put the time in and spend the energy to do it, it's still going to be hard for you.
It's oftentimes purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about that in my book a lot, where you have purposeful choices that are done in a certain way, not because you just fall into it, because you purposely chose to turn into a different direction. So moving on here, rationalizing. I was thinking through it, and I thought, this can actively be a form of anxiety management. So I said we're not going to be talking about specific, mental health factors that affect this with diagnostics and stuff, but as an example of that, we can use our cognition as a super effective tool directing our brain, frontal cortex thought process, directing our brain internally with the limbic system to operate differently, to change course, to stop a process. And that's something that we do in therapy. Again, cognitive therapy, that cognitive behavioral therapy, that directly is some of the strategies, we create. Because, in anxiety, the brain is interpreting an active threat. It's interpreting a risk somewhere. The amygdala is scanning around. And when you see an active threat, that rationalization can counter. Wait a minute, this isn't an active threat. The germs are on the door handle, yeah, but I mean, I can touch the door handle and not die. Rationalizing can catch that stuff. So, mental health conditions can cause an imbalance of this process, but therapy and cognition is a way to balance that. So, also then moving to rationalizations as a protection. Okay, what do I think I mean by that? When acting irrationally, we can defend ourselves better. We're more in management of the situation. So I like Navy SEALs. That's one of the things Craig and I have in common. We like to think about things from that direction. And I was reading a book about Osama bin Laden, and one of the guys who was on that team in that operation. They're like, got a question, and the questioner's like, "Hey, what were you feeling like? And were you all amped up? Or did you charge in? Did you charge up?" And the guy was like, "No, not at all."
That's the last thing you want.
That's the last thing you want. And what he said is, you do not want to be all amped up and run into a gunfight. It's where you get killed.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, no, we took a step up the stairs and assessed as we were going where the next step was and the next step, and kind of peered around the corner and took the next flight up. I mean, it almost seemed like it took him 5 minutes to go up a flight of stairs.
Well, I think Chris Lawrence talked about that in his police training. The idea that the more you put yourself through something, and the more you can add more logic to it or more rationalization to it, and you take out a lot of the emotions to it, you do perform better. You do get to the point. That's why, with Craig and his jiu-jitsu, with anyone who does any types of martial arts or self-defense, the more they train, when they get in that position, one, they don't have the anxiety or the stress that their body freezes up with. It's natural instincts. They can think while their body's reacting. It's so important to better perform.
That's why, it, for instance, scares me, like of gun owners that aren't familiar with gun owning in the situation and stuff. I mean, it is downright dangerous because your emotional system takes charge.
I feel like gun owners and people who drive should almost have like routine, like you have to make sure you're driving this much. You have to use your gun this much, because it's just... It is rough. We saw that with our 16-year-old, he got his license now, and like he hated driving, and just him not driving for like a week.
Oh wow.
At first, like when he had his permit, like the way he drove was like, did you forget how to use a steering wheel?
He literally did.
Like, my Lord. But now that he's been driving to school every day, and it's different. So it is important that, like you said, if you are a gun owner, you should go to the range and you should shoot, and you should be comfortable handling it, holding it. That way when you get in those situations, it's better. And that rationalization of, why did I buy a gun? What is it for? It's self-defense. It protects me. It makes me safer. There's a lot of stuff with that people should do and should follow.
When you're rational and rationalizing things, you can protect and defend yourself better. Such as even in the extreme situation of domestic violence. One of the things we said a little bit ago is you fall into some traps of literally believing things that aren't true. I think you brought that up. And when you back off of that type of negative rationalizing and minimizing, and you begin to think through and purposely catch that, you can catch the idea that my husband said I'm a loser person who can't make friends. Like, you got to catch those thoughts, because if rationalizing just continues to perpetually go without any check, you will literally believe that I am a stupid person that can't make friends. That's the power of perception. And so you can defend yourself better. You can protect yourself better when you are aware of the rationalizing process that goes on, or even to a lesser degree, just when there's emotional turmoil. It creates these engulfment and abandonment insecurities. Well, they can layer harder, meaning be stronger in your life if it doesn't get checked. The abandonment fear. I'm going to be left. I'm going to be alone. I'm not valued. I'm not important. Those are fear-based statements. Well, if you don't check those fears and insecurities, and you rationalize, you'll find all sorts of ways that prove your spouse did these things that just prove your fear to be true.
Yeah, because that's how you're rationalizing it. Yeah.
When it's not true. When it's not true. So positive being rational through a thought process can help you defend your fears, yourself from your fears better. It can be a powerful tool. We just protect ourselves with a defense segment, just as we were talking about with defense. So we can truly be our own worst enemy, when the rationalizations demoralize us. So it's really like I alluded, the goal kind of gets to developing the balance between how we operate through defending ourselves, through protecting ourselves. There's the good and bad in it. So let's revisit. Yeah, is rationalizing good or is it bad? What have you thought about in your car? How would you come to conclusion with that? Is it good or is it bad, Neil? What are you thinking?
I think rationalization is a good thing. I just think you have to, based on everything we've talked about, the one thing that struck me at the end is you have to rationalize with reality. You have to. Well,
there's a quote.
You have to compare your rationalization to really what is really going on. What really is the reality of the situation.
I love that. We need to get co-host quotes. Have a list.
Wish I remembered what I just said.
What you said is we have to rationalize with reality, and I think that is true. I think that is absolutely true. We have to rationalize with reality. Otherwise, we can get run over, But how you go about that, I think what I really wanted to do with this topic when I was thinking about it is, blow up the myth and stereotype that rationalizing is bad. Yeah, I think that's where people tend to land on.
I think they go to that extreme. They go to that extreme case of that domestic abuse person who keeps going back to that person. They rationalize that behavior, or the addict that rationalizes getting back in. And you're right. I think there is a negative connotation to that, but in reality, like you said, I think rationalization when it comes to relationships is almost necessary to help you have empathy or understanding for the other person too. I think, if you can help rationalize why they did something, you have a better understanding, so you know how to help them. You think about why does John keep going back to the bar to drink every night? Why does Susie keep going back to her partner? What's really going on?
And you add a new layer of understanding, not just yourself, but other people. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think rationalization is after talking and going through all the pieces, rationalization is something that we've developed because it's important to our lives. It's important to our survival. And of course, with the shift in society, we're no longer hunting, gathering, and being chased by woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tigers.
Yep.
So the rationalization has now become more important than it was in the past. So,
but I think that the second part of that is they're not really all bad at all, but they have to be in balance. Mm-hmm. Because there are, I'm telling you, particularly, people that are arguably mentally unhealthy can really get stuck and run riot over themselves over and over and over again. Deeply rooted, deeply engraved beliefs about yourself because the rationalization has taken over in a negative direction. And that just gets, think of it this way. The reason why we really need to have this imbalance is this way. You know how you take an ink pen on a piece of paper, you just write a line.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens when you trace that line?
It's never the same.
Right?
And the more you trace it,
again and again and again, it gets darker and darker and bolder, wider and wider. It's not the same. It's more pronounced. And that's the fearful thing that I get concerned about. Sometimes I have people that have been having a repetitive thought their entire life and never realized it. And they've layered it so deep that it's hard to dig out of that. It's hard to kind of, work with what is the motivation here, what's going on. And so that's why it's really important to have, some balance with all of this process. Mm-hmm. And a lot of good can come from it. So I don't know. Pretty cool, eh?
Very cool.
Thoughts, questions, taxiing in to get out of here, I think.
I thought of really, with your aligning example, the one thing I thought of being a computer person is like, imagine having a story and you manually have to retype that over and over again. How often do you type exactly that? And then after about 50 copies, are you actually still have the same story? You know, you start with a paragraph and then it ends up being simple. So, and I think that rationalization reality is saying, okay, I typed it the first time, this is what happened. And then after 10 times, because you're not really looking at it, you're kind of just going what you think. Take that time to go back and reread that first one and really compare your rationalization from the last 10 things you've thought to really what happened.
And if you do that over a period of time,
and that's the story goes completely different. You go from
with your own thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Susie bought me a candy bar to she hit me with her car. Like, how did that even happen?
Yeah,
like,
no, it's like the telephone game when you play with little kids. We literally do that with ourselves. And interesting that you would come to that, Neil. And I hope you stay tuned to this because here at the end you bring up literally a therapy strategy. Like that is something that we will do from time to time. It's actually going to be in part of a sexual abuse class that we're designing right now. That's part of what you can do at home to manage your harmful, traumatic story. You write it, and then you rewrite it, and then you rewrite it. And you can actually reframe your understanding of literally what happened. The facts don't change, but your understanding, your rationalization changes.
and you can go back to see really how destructive the first ones were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not, you know, we talked about early, talking out loud. Even writing it can be that way. You kind of take that.
Did I really say that? Do I really think that way? Oh my gosh.
So you know, when you hear your recordings, like, does that really how I sound?
Oh yeah. When I listen to transcriptions and listen to the show sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't mean that. Now we haven't done any editing. I'm usually not concerned.
Yeah, we've actually been pretty good about it. So
yeah, usually not too concerned. So listen, we're going to get out of here today. I'm glad you hung out with us. Appreciate you being with us. Be careful about rationalizing, but use its ability to change your life, because when you're really on top and purposeful of what is my rationalizations, what are my thoughts, particularly in a therapy experience, but maybe in line with the objective third party, or even as Neil's talked about a few times today in his teaching moments there, very valuable. Write them down in your own story so that you can really get through to the idea of what am I really motivated by? How am I really operational in my life, thoughts and relationships, actions, thoughts, and behaviors? So stay tuned to us. We will see you next week. Take care. Have a good week.